The snow came down hard sideways like it was angry. Willa Red Elk pulled Tommy closer against her hip, her fingers stiff and red with cold. Her breath came in short gasps, each one burning her throat. The wind shrieked through the bare branches overhead, and the frozen ground beneath their boots offered no mercy. Her left leg dragged slightly, each step more labored than the last. It wasn't the cold slowing her. It was the deep, dull throb shooting up from her ankle into her calf. Something was wrong, had been wrong since early morning. But now it was worse. Almost there, she whispered more to herself than the boy. Her lips cracked as she spoke the words, barely making it past her frozen mouth. Tommy said nothing. He hadn't said much in days. The cold had swallowed most of the talk out of him. 6 years old, too small for a world this harsh, but still trudging through it because she told him to. His wool cap drooped low over his eyebrows. The mitten on his left hand had a hole at the thumb. His cheeks were wind-chapped, raw and ruddy. Willa glanced down. He was still holding onto her coat with one hand, his other stuffed in his pocket. His head was lowered against the wind, same as hers, but he kept glancing up at her, as if trying to measure something in her face she wouldn't show. The storm blurred the horizon sky, and land merging in a smear of gray. But she saw it then, just through the flurry, a shape, a roofline, smoke faint and curling from a crooked chimney. Her chest tightened. There, she breathed. "See that baby, just a little more." Tommy nodded, small and serious. He didn't smile. He never smiled unless he knew it was safe. The cabin sat back from the road, tucked against a rise in the land, with bare aspens hunched along its side like sentries. A fence, mostly broken, sagged in the front. Snow had drifted knee-high across the yard. Willa's steps grew uneven. Her breath hitched. She tried to hide it. Failed. Tommy tugged gently at her coat. "Mama, I'm fine," she lied. She wasn't. Her ankle buckled. It was sudden. No warning. She dropped hard onto her knee, and the world tilted. The sack on her back hit the ground with a dull thud. Flour burst from a tear in the canvas and scattered into the snow like smoke. She didn't cry out, didn't curse, just closed her eyes and leaned back against a fence post. The wind found her face. Her lashes clumped together with ice. Mama Tommy's voice cracked. "I just need a minute," she murmured. Her fingers dug into the snow to stay upright. Tommy knelt beside her. His little hands fumbled with the frayed laces of her boot, trying to tug it off. "Don't," she said weakly, placing a trembling hand on his. "It's not bleeding. Just bruised, I think." But she didn't know. It felt like fire was climbing her leg from the inside out. That scared her more than the cold. Tommy looked around. The cabin was just ahead, close enough to see a shadow move inside the window. "I'll go," he said suddenly. And before she could stop him, he was running, if it could be called running, through the drifted snow legs, short but determined. Willa wanted to call him back, to tell him to wait, to be careful. But she didn't have the breath. She could only watch as he reached the door and raised his mittened fist. 3 knocks, then silence. The door creaked open. A man stepped out, broad-shouldered, taller than most, wrapped in a wool coat dark with snowmelt. His beard was black with streaks of silver, his eyes shadowed beneath the brim of his hat. He looked from the boy to the woman collapsed near the fence. Then he moved. Willa saw his boots first, dark, worn, heavy, crunching toward her. Then the outline of his frame above her, blotting out the falling snow. She tensed as he crouched beside her. "I didn't faint," she said hoarsely. "And I didn't fall. My leg just doesn't listen right now." He didn't ask questions, didn't speak, just slipped an arm behind her shoulders, another beneath her knees, and lifted her clean off the ground. She weighed next to nothing these days, but his grip was solid. No hesitation. With one hand he held her close. With the other he reached for Tommy's. The boy took it. They crossed the snow-covered yard in silence. Inside the cabin was dim but warm. The scent of burning pine and iron filled her nose. It hit her like a wave. She flinched from it too much, too fast, but then the warmth sank into her skin and stayed. He set her gently on a chair near the fire. Her ankle throbbed. She bit her lip to keep from showing it. Tommy stood next to her, one hand clutching her skirt. The man crossed to a low shelf, pulled down a folded wool blanket, and handed it to her without a word. Then 2 battered tin mugs, one for her, one for Tommy. Warm water. Simple, but more than she'd expected. She didn't thank him. The quiet between them said not to. She just nodded, wrapped the blanket over Tommy's shoulders first, then her own. The fire crackled louder. Light danced on the floorboards. The room was plain pine walls, plank floor, a faded scarf folded neatly on a dresser, untouched by dust. This place had once been touched by a woman's hand. Willa could feel it. She wondered how long ago that had been. The man returned with a small basin and a kettle. His voice, when he finally spoke, was rough and low. "Can you get the boot off?" She shook her head. "It's swollen." No judgment in his face. He knelt, placed the basin near her feet, and began unlacing her boot with surprising gentleness. When she winced, he slowed. His hands were strong but careful, like he was used to fixing things that broke easy. Tommy sat on the rug near the fire, watching. "You stay warm," the man told him. "I got this." Tommy obeyed. The boot slid off with effort. Her ankle had bloomed purple and red. The man didn't comment. He soaked a cloth, wrung it out, pressed it gently against her skin. "Just bruised," he said. "Might be a sprain. You'll be all right." Willa exhaled, shoulders relaxing. "Thank you." He didn't reply. Instead, he turned back to the fire, washed his hands, and began sharpening a knife slowly, the rasp of steel against stone the only sound in the room. Tommy tugged at his sleeve. The man looked down. "My coat has a tear," the boy said softly. The man's brow furrowed. Then he reached for a tin box. Needle, thread, button. Willa watched him mend the boy's coat, one careful stitch at a time. The man didn't ask who they were, or why they'd come. He just worked quietly. And when he tousled Tommy's hair with a single rough hand, the boy leaned into it like it had always been that way. And for the first time in days, Willa Red Elk felt something loosen in her chest. Not relief, but the memory of it. "I didn't faint, and I didn't fall. My leg just stopped listening." Willa said it again quietly this time, like repeating it might give her back a little control. She sat upright in the wooden chair near the hearth, the wool blanket wrapped tight around her shoulders, and Tommy's, her breath finally coming easier in the thick warmth of the cabin. The man hadn't offered his name. He hadn't asked for hers either. She figured that was fair. Words were currency out here, and no one spent them unless they had to. The fire cracked and spit softly. The warmth had drawn color back to Tommy's cheeks, and now he lay curled on the rug, dozing lightly. Willa watched the slow rise and fall of his chest, her hand resting gently on the edge of his shoulder. Her own leg throbbed steadily under the blanket, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. The pain hadn't dulled much since the boot came off. It burned low and mean, but she bit down on it. The man moved across the cabin, gathering things, methodical but not rushed. He opened a wooden chest near the far wall and pulled out a second blanket, then a folded shirt, and set them near the hearth. There was a rhythm to the way he moved, like he wasn't just doing chores, he was keeping something at bay. Willa's eyes flicked to the shelves that lined the calces. Everything was neat, sparse but nothing left to rot. Jars of dried beans, corn, a few with herbs she half recognized. A worn Bible lay face down on the edge of a narrow table. Above it hung an embroidery hoop with a half-finished flower thread still tucked into the needle, like someone had set it down one day and never picked it up again. "You live out here alone?" she asked. The man didn't look up from the pot he was filling at the water barrel. "Mostly." She nodded, though he wasn't looking. "You don't talk much," she said after a while. "I do when I need to." And now he glanced at her then. "Just briefly. You needed help, not talking." She held his gaze for a beat, then looked down. "Fair enough." He brought the pot to the fire, settled it into the iron swing arm over the flame, and turned to her again. "You eat," she shook her head. "Not since yesterday morning." He didn't comment, just reached for a tin of salt pork, sliced a few strips into the pot, and added a handful of dried beans from a jar. The smell came slowly, warm and savory, like a memory of something good. Willa closed her eyes for a moment. The last 2 weeks had been a blur of footsteps and fear. She'd barely slept, barely thought, just kept moving. She opened her eyes again to find him setting 2 cracked bowls and a pair of spoons on the small table near the hearth. "I got some bread from the last trade run," he said. "It's hard as fence rail, but it'll soften." "Thank you," she murmured. He gave a quiet grunt and turned back to stir the pot. She shifted in the chair, winced. He glanced over. "How bad?" She sighed through her nose. "Swollen. Feels like heat under the skin. Could be a sprain. Might have twisted it up under the knee, too." "You sound like you've seen plenty of these." He didn't answer. Tommy stirred, then murmured something into the wool. Willa reached down and smoothed his hair with her fingers, soft as breath. "He hasn't said much since we left," she said. "Just started talking again when he saw you. He's young. They watch more than they speak." Willa's eyes drifted back to the embroidery hoop. "There was a woman here." His shoulders stiffened just barely. "Yes. And a child." A pause. "Yes." She didn't push, just nodded. The cabin held echoes, soft ones, but they were here. A scarf left folded too neatly. A toy horse tucked behind a jar of oats. Things people don't just forget. The man took the pot off the flame and ladled soup into the bowls. He handed one to her. She accepted it carefully, balancing the bowl in one hand while keeping her weight off her leg. He took a seat across from her back, straight spoon, moving slow and quiet. "Name's Luke," he said finally, not looking up. "Willa." He nodded once, then looked toward the boy. "His name Tommy." Luke's eyes lingered a second longer. "Tough little fella." Willa managed a half smile. "He didn't get that from me." They ate in silence for a while. The warmth seeped deeper into her limbs, dulling the edge of the cold, but not the ache in her leg. Still, she felt steadier, fed, seen, if only a little. After the bowls were empty, Luke stood and rinsed them in a basin with melted snow water. Willa eased herself lower in the chair, adjusting the blanket around Tommy, who was now fully asleep, again curled up like a kitten. She didn't realize she'd dozed off until the sound of metal sliding against leather brought her eyes open. Luke was at the back table sharpening a knife. The rasp of stone on steel had a steady rhythm, almost calming. She watched him for a moment. There was something precise about him, not just careful, controlled. "You were a soldier?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. "Scout," he said. "Years back." She nodded, feeling the pieces fall into place. He cleaned the blade, returned it to its sheath, then moved to the door and cracked it open. Snow blew in, but only a little. He stood in the frame for a long minute, watching the white-covered world outside. Willa couldn't see his face from where she sat, but his stillness said enough. The wind moaned low across the land. A coyote called far off. He shut the door gently. She watched him cross the room and settle into a chair near the fire. Not across from her, not too close. Just enough. They didn't speak again for some time. The fire crackled. The wind eased. Then softly from his chair, Luke spoke. "You got a place you're headed?" She hesitated. "I did." "You runnin' from someone?" Her fingers tightened on the edge of the blanket. "Not exactly." He waited. "I took something back," she said finally. "Something that was mine, that someone else thought he owned." Luke didn't flinch. "Man with money?" he asked. "And men willing to use guns for it," she said. He nodded slowly. She looked into the fire. "I didn't come to bring you trouble." "Trouble's already here," he said, voice even. "Question is, what you plan to do about it." She looked up at him. Not defensive. Just tired. "I'm not running anymore," she said. Luke held her gaze unreadable. Then just barely, he nodded. Outside, the wind shifted direction. Inside, a boy slept, and a man who'd once given up on strangers looked at a woman who might just be worth standing for. "Your boy found the horse. Mine carved it." The fire had burned low by the time Willa noticed the little carved horse. Tommy was sitting cross-legged in front of the bookshelf, silent, careful the way he always was in new places. His fingers moved over the toy with reverence, tracing its shape, its rough edges worn smooth from time and hands long gone. The wood was dark, polished in places by touch, the form just detailed enough to recognize it as a pony. One ear was chipped, the legs were uneven. It was not made by a craftsman. It was made by someone who needed it to exist. Willa watched her son study it, his face still with concentration. The boy had never had a proper toy. Not since his father died. Not since everything they owned had been tossed from their home like trash in the road. She swallowed and looked away. Luke had stepped outside just after supper. Said he needed to check the lean-to and make sure the snow hadn't collapsed the roof. She didn't ask if he needed help. He didn't ask for company. Now the cabin was quiet again. Fire crackling low in the hearth. The air thick with the smell of smoke, boiled beans, and pine sap. She shifted in her chair, careful with her leg, and reached for the blanket that had slipped off Tommy's shoulders. "Come sit by me," she said gently. Tommy turned, the little horse still clutched in his hand, and made his way back to her. He crawled up and leaned into her side, resting his head against her ribs. She ran her hand over his hair. "You like that horse?" she asked softly. He nodded against her. "It feels old, but not broken." She kissed the top of his head. Maybe it just needed to be found again. The door opened, then letting in a brief rush of cold. Luke stepped inside and shut it behind him with a quiet thud. Snow dusted his shoulders, melting fast. He pulled off his gloves and crossed to the fire, rubbing his hands near the flames. Tommy looked up at him. "I found this," he said, holding up the horse. Luke glanced at it, then at Willa. "Your boy found the horse," he said, voice low. "Mine carved it." Willa felt her breath catch in her throat. The sentence came like a stone dropped in still water, quiet but heavy. Luke crouched beside the fire, watching the flames instead of them. He was 7, he added. Didn't have much talent for it. But he wanted to make something with his hands. Willa didn't speak. She just watched him. Something about the way he said it, plain stripped of grief but not untouched by it, told her everything she needed to know. "I'm sorry," she said finally. He didn't answer right away. Just reached forward, poked the coals with the iron poker, and said, "Me too." Tommy handed the horse toward him. "Do you want it back?" Luke shook his head. "No, son. It's yours now." Tommy looked to his mother, uncertain. Willa nodded. "Say thank you." "Thank you," he said quietly. Luke's gaze softened. He sat back on his heels, his hand resting on one knee. He would have liked knowing someone else was holding it. Willa studied his face. The beard, the lines near his eyes, the way his shoulders sat too square for someone at peace. She wondered how many winters he'd passed like this. Alone, with a carved horse and a memory. "I never meant to bring this into your life," she said. "You already did." She straightened in the chair, adjusting her leg. "You want to know why we were out there?" He didn't move, just waited. Willa exhaled long and slow. "My husband Samuel worked the red birch mine outside of Sheridan. He was a good man, careful, quiet, like you." Luke didn't respond, but he stayed still, listening. "They said the cave-in was an act of God. That's what the papers wrote. But the truth was different. The timber supports had been left to rot. Everyone knew it, but they kept digging anyway. That mine fed 3 counties. Her voice didn't rise, but it didn't need to. He was trapped for 2 days before anyone even tried to reach them. They pulled out 6 bodies. Samuel was one of them." Luke's eyes never left the fire. "We lost the land 3 weeks later. Man named Wade Harlan showed up with a signed deed claiming my husband had sold it to him before the accident. I knew it was forged. I had the real deed. Still do." She looked at Luke, now steady. "He's been trying to take it from me ever since." Luke turned his head, finally meeting her eyes. "You stole it back." "I took what was mine," she said. "He calls it theft. I call it justice." Tommy curled tighter against her, the carved horse still clutched in his hand. Luke nodded once, slow. "Wade Harlan," he said. "I've heard the name." "Plenty of folks have," she said. "He pays well to stay in power." Luke stood across the room and poured himself a mug of water. He drank half, then set it down. "He'll come for you." Willa didn't flinch. "He already has. He won't stop." "I know." Luke walked to the small window, peeled back the curtain. Snow still fell slow and steady. The land outside was blanketed in silence. A peace that didn't last. "Why here?" he asked. "Why come this way? I knew he'd follow the wagon road south. He doesn't know the land up here. He doesn't think I'd survive the backcountry." "You almost didn't." "I would have," she said quietly, then added, "But I'm grateful I didn't have to." Luke let the curtain fall back into place. He turned toward her. "You got a plan?" "I was heading to Red Hollow. There's a lawyer there. One of the few who'll look a man like Wade in the eye and not blink." Luke crossed his arms, leaned against the window frame. "You think a piece of paper's going to stop a man like that?" She held his gaze. I think truth matters. And I think if he gets away with this, my son grows up believing nothing's his unless someone richer says so." Luke said nothing for a long time. Then he walked back to the fire, stirred the coals again, and added another log. "You'll stay here," he said. Willa blinked. "That a request or a command?" "Neither," he said, voice low. "Just common sense." She studied him. "You don't even know me." "I know enough." Tommy had drifted off again, his head heavy against her ribs. Willa leaned back, her eyes on the fire. The cabin was warm. For the first time in a long while, she felt the cold, not chasing her, but waiting outside. Locked out. At least for now. Luke reached up, took something from the mantel. A small cloth pouch. He opened it and spilled a handful of dried leaves into his hand. "I got a friend," he said. "Cheyenne elder. Isaac Little Light. Lives 2 ridges east. Knows more about healing than half the doctors I've met. I'll ride out tomorrow, see if he's home." Willa nodded, heart thudding slow and heavy in her chest. "I'd like that," she said. Luke nodded. And just like that, they'd started building something between them. Not trust, not yet, but the shape of it, the beginning. "You two are like trees thinking you're alone, but the roots touch underground." The knock came just before dawn, 3 soft raps against the cabin door, measured, not urgent. Luke was already up, boots on kettle warming above the fire. He glanced at Willa, still asleep in the chair and with Tommy curled beside her, then crossed the room. He didn't need to ask who it was. He opened the door and stepped aside without a word. The man outside entered without hesitation, stomping the snow from his boots. He wore a long, battered coat that smelled of cedar and horses, and a fur-lined cap low over weather-creased features. A satchel hung at his side, thick with herbs and wrapped bundles. "Long ride?" Luke asked. Isaac Little Light nodded, brushing snow from his shoulders. Sky was talking all night. Figured it was time to listen. Luke closed the door behind him. "They're asleep." "Then we'll speak low," Isaac said, glancing toward the hearth. His eyes lingered on Willa and Tommy for a long moment. "They made it farther than I expected." Luke stirred the fire, adding a log with quiet hands. "The boy's strong. The mother's stronger." Isaac set his bag on the table, pulled off his gloves, and moved toward them with the calm of someone who's seen enough not to be surprised anymore. He knelt beside Willa. She stirred, half waking, blinking in the dim light. "I'm not here to startle," Isaac said gently. "Just to look." Willa sat up straighter, shifting her weight off her leg. "You must be Isaac." He smiled, brief and kind. "And you must be stubborn. I can smell it on you." That got the edge of a smile from her. Tommy blinked awake beside her, his small hand gripping her skirt. "It's all right," Willa whispered. "This man's a healer." Tommy looked up at Isaac, then back to his mother. He nodded, but stayed close. Isaac opened his satchel and pulled out a jar of thick yellow paste and a pouch of dried leaves. "Show me the leg," he said softly. Willa hesitated, but the quiet in the room said she was safe. She eased the blanket back and rolled up her skirt. The bruising had spread deep violet, now the skin hot to the touch. Isaac's fingers were warm and sure as he examined it. Not broken, but the swelling's bad. "You walked too far on it. We didn't have much choice." "I know," he said. "Doesn't mean your body forgives it." He crushed some of the leaves into a bowl, added water from the kettle, and mixed it with the paste until it formed a thick, dark smear. The smell was sharp pine and earth and something bitter. "This will pull the heat down. Might sting." I can take it. He nodded and began applying the mixture gently along the swollen skin. Willa winced, but didn't flinch. Tommy watched with wide eyes. "Why does it smell like tree bark?" he asked. Isaac looked at him. "Because it is. Trees carry medicine. You just have to know where to look." Tommy considered that. When the poultice was in place, Isaac wrapped her leg with soft cloth strips and tied them firm. Then he washed his hands in the basin near the fire and turned to Luke. "You were right to bring me," he said. Luke leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "I knew it was getting worse." Willa adjusted the blanket around Tommy and said, "Thank you." Isaac nodded. "Pain's a teacher, but it doesn't have to be cruel." He poured himself a mug of hot water and sat at the table, stretching out his legs. The cabin had grown quiet again, only the pop of the fire and the rustle of wind outside. "Word in the wind is there's a man stirring trouble in the south," Isaac said. "Land baron with too many friends in too many uniforms." Willa looked at him sharply. "Wade Harlan." Isaac's eyes didn't blink. "You know him. I know what he took from me." Isaac sipped from his mug. "He's been offering coin for information. Mostly whispers now, but enough of them make it north even this far." Luke said nothing, but his jaw had set. "I've got the deed," Willa said quietly. "The real one, with my husband's signature." Wade forged another, claimed we sold it to him. He took everything house land, even the mule. "And now you've got it back," Isaac said. "Yes, and he'll come for it." "He will," Isaac agreed. "Not because he needs the land, but because you told him no." Luke stepped away from the wall, poured another mug of hot water, and handed it to Willa. She accepted it with both hands. "I never asked to stay," she said after a moment. "I didn't want to bring this down on anyone else." "You think this land's clean of blood already?" Isaac asked. "This place knows what it means to fight for what's yours. It remembers. And so do we." Willa looked at him, brows drawn. "You talk like the trees can hear us." Isaac smiled, faint and knowing. "You two are like trees thinking you're alone, but the roots touch underground." Tommy tilted his head. "What does that mean?" "It means," Isaac said, looking at the boy, "that sometimes you're already part of something even if you don't know it yet." Tommy seemed to accept that. Willa wrapped an arm around him and drew him closer. "I'm tired of running," she said. Luke looked at her across the fire. "Then stay." She met his eyes, unsure but not retreating. Isaac rose, brushing crumbs from his coat. "She'll need rest. And quiet. That leg's not ready for more travel." "She won't be moving anytime soon," Luke said. Isaac packed his satchel. "I'll come again in 3 days. If the swelling's down, she'll start walking on it." Slow. He pulled a small pouch from his coat and handed it to Tommy. "Here, for the fire, when it burns low." Tommy peeked inside. It was full of tiny pine cones, all tied together with a red thread. "Why these?" they remind the fire. "It has stories left to tell." Isaac said, then ruffled the boy's hair and turned toward the door. Willa called out softly, "Isaac." He paused, one hand on the handle. "Why did you come? You didn't know us." "I knew Luke," he said. "And he doesn't call for help unless it matters." He opened the door and stepped into the snow. The cold swept in for only a second before it shut again behind him. Luke moved back to the fire and sat. Tommy curled beside his mother once more, still clutching the pouch. Willa sipped her water and let the silence settle. "Does he always talk like that?" she asked. Luke gave a faint smile. He does. And he's usually right. They stayed like that a long while, the three of them, wrapped in wool and firelight. Outside, the snow kept falling, but inside, something had shifted. Not spoken aloud, but present all the same. A tether pulled tight between strangers who no longer felt like strangers. And for the first time since the road turned cold, Willa let herself lean into it. They didn't say your name, just said you were trouble. The wind had softened by mid-morning, shifting to the kind that whispered through pine boughs and made fences groan in the cold. Luke saddled his mare just after sunrise, gave Willa a short nod, and rode out toward the general store in Hallow Ridge, 20 miles south. Willa watched him disappear into the tree line from the front window, her leg propped on a stool wrapped snugly in Isaac's cloth bandage. Tommy sat on the floor near the hearth, coloring in silence with charcoal on scrapwood. The little carved horse rested beside him, propped against a tin mug like it was watching over the boy. "He'll be back before supper," she told Tommy, though he hadn't asked. He just nodded, then looked toward the window. Willa's gaze drifted to the same spot, but her mind was elsewhere. Too many miles behind her. Too many faces she'd passed that had turned away instead of offering help. But not Luke. He'd said little but done everything. That counted more. In town, Martha Klein was wiping down the front window of her dry goods store when Luke dismounted. He tied the reins to the post and stepped up onto the porch. Martha was in her late 40s, sharp-eyed, graying at the temples, and quick to spot the dust of trouble long before it blew in. "You're out early," she said without looking at him. "Need flour, oats, and coffee. Anything you got worth trading?" Martha opened the door and waved him inside. "You bring anything besides a long face?" Luke stepped in, pulled off his gloves, and handed her a pouch with a few rabbit pelts and a small tin of ground herbs. "Fresh this week. And Isaac swears by that mix for winter cough." Martha eyed the pouch, then nodded. Fair trade. She moved behind the counter, started pulling supplies. "You come alone?" Luke didn't answer. Martha snorted. "Didn't think so. Saw 2 extra bedrolls in the back of your rig last time you were here, and word's been floating down from the south." Luke's shoulders tensed. Martha leaned in slightly, dropping her voice. "They didn't say your name, just said you were trouble." Luke met her eyes. "Who's saying it? Folks tied to Wade Harlan. He's got men asking questions, and Timber Fork may be here next. Put out a quiet bounty, they say. Big enough to make good men squint and bad ones start riding." Luke kept his face still. "You hear what for woman and a child? Real vague. Just said she stole something valuable. Said he wants her alive if possible." Martha's mouth twisted. "But you know how that goes." He didn't need to ask. She slid the flour sack across the counter. "You sure you know what you're doing?" No, Luke said. "But I know what I'm not doing, and that's handing her over." Martha paused, one hand on the coffee tin. "How bad is it gonna get?" Luke glanced out the window. The road looked empty. Snow slushed in patches under the eaves. "Depends how many men Wade thinks he needs," he said. Martha nodded once, then pulled out a canvas satchel and started loading supplies into it. "Tell her to keep her head low. And you watch your back." Luke gave a small nod of thanks, slung the bag over his shoulder, and stepped back into the cold. He rode hard on the way back, the mare kicking up powdery snow as the land rolled past in silence. The sun had started its slow descent by the time he reached the cabin. Smoke curled from the chimney. He felt the knots in his shoulders ease just slightly. Inside, Willa looked up as the door opened. She took one look at Luke's face and knew something had shifted. He set the satchel down near the table, removed his coat, and went straight to the stove to stir the pot. Willa waited. "They're looking for you," he said finally. "Words traveled." She didn't ask how far or how fast. She just nodded, lips pressed tight. "Wade," she asked. Luke nodded. "Put out a bounty. Low enough to keep it quiet. High enough to make it worth chasing. Anyone else know I'm here, Martha suspects." "She won't talk." Willa let out a slow breath. "How much did he offer?" "Didn't ask," Luke said. "Didn't need to." She ran a hand down Tommy's back, who was now curled beside her, half dozing after lunch. "Then we don't have long," she murmured. "No," Luke agreed. "We don't." He sat at the table, elbows on his knees, and looked at her for a long moment. "You ever fired a rifle?" "Yes," she said. "Good." Silence followed. Not awkward, just full, heavy with the weight of what they both knew might come. Willa rubbed her temples. "I should have left it." "The deed," she nodded. "If I hadn't taken it back, maybe he'd have let us go." "No," Luke said, voice firm. "He'd have followed anyway. Men like that don't care what's theirs, just what they think ought to be." She looked at him, really looked. "You believe that I've lived it?" Willa stared into the fire. "I just wanted Tommy to have somewhere solid, something I could hand him when he was grown, a piece of earth that couldn't be bought out from under him." "You still can," Luke said. She didn't answer. Later, as the sun dipped and the land turned pink and gray, Willa stood at the window watching shadows lengthen across the snow. Tommy was asleep again, curled in a nest of wool. Luke was outside chopping wood, his shirt clinging to his back from the effort. Willa felt something stir in her chest, something unfamiliar and too close to comfort. She turned back toward the fire. As she sat, her eyes caught on the edge of her bag near the wall. She reached over and unbuckled the flap. Dug beneath the wrapped loaf of bread and spare socks until she found it a folded parchment sealed in wax. She opened it, hands steady. The real deed. Her name. Samuel's signature. The land description in ink, still clear, though slightly smudged from weather and time. She laid it flat on the table. Luke stepped inside, wiping his hands with a rag. He saw the paper and walked over. "That's what Wade wants?" he asked. Willa nodded. "He used a lawyer in Greystone to forge another one. Claimed Samuel sold it to him a week before the collapse. But my husband never signed anything." Luke leaned over and studied the signature. "This been notarized. There's a copy with a lawyer in Red Hollow, man named Ellis Choate. He helped us draft it when we settled. I was on my way to find him before the snow came." "You'll still get there," Luke said. Willa looked up at him. "You sure about that?" He held her gaze. "If I have to carry you both there myself." Her eyes searched his face, and this time she didn't look away. Outside, the cold thickened again. Somewhere in the distance, a crow called once, then fell silent. Inside, firelight danced against old wood and newer truths, and between them lay a piece of paper that could save them or bring everything down. "No more running. Let the snow carry my scent. I'm done hiding." Willa stood at the cabin door, her crutch steady beneath her arm, watching the shadows stretch across the clearing. The afternoon sun sank behind the ridge, dragging a long silence with it. The cold bit sharp at her cheeks, but she didn't move. Her breath steamed in the fading light, and her fingers curled tight around the edge of the doorframe. Luke was behind her, oiling the hinge of his rifle with quiet purpose. He hadn't said much since returning from town, but his presence was like iron in the air, solid, steady. It hadn't escaped either of them that Wade Harlan's reach stretched further than they'd hoped. She heard Luke set the cloth down, then the click of metal sliding back into place. "You don't have to be out here," he said. "I know," Willa replied. He walked to stand beside her, looking out at the trees. Snow clung to the branches like lace, delicate but cold. "If we leave before sunrise," he said, "we could make the pass by evening. Red Hollow's 2 days from there. Maybe less if your leg, no." Her voice was calm, not sharp. Just final. Luke looked at her. "I'm not running again," she said, eyes fixed on the tree line. "I've done enough of that. Let him come." Luke didn't argue. She adjusted her stance, wincing slightly as her weight shifted to the healing leg. "I used to think survival meant leaving everything behind before it could be taken. But it never worked. I just ended up with less each time." "You have a child," he said quietly. "There's no shame in keeping him safe." "I know," she said. "But what am I teaching him if I keep running from men who think they can own us?" Luke didn't answer, but he didn't look away either. Tommy was inside, asleep in the corner, curled under the thick buffalo hide Isaac had brought days ago. His little body had stopped flinching in his sleep. That was something. Willa couldn't bear to take that piece from him again. She reached for the door, slowly closing it against the cold. Luke stepped back, moved to the window, and adjusted the rifle propped against the wall. "If we're staying," he said, "then we start preparing." Willa nodded. "What do you need me to do?" Luke gave her a long look. "Tell me where you hid the deed." She blinked, caught off guard. He waited. She crossed to her pack, reached into the lining and pulled it free, folded, sealed, bound with a fraying strip of leather. "Here." He took it, opened it carefully, and read over it again. Then, without a word, walked to the back wall, pried up a loose board beneath the stove and placed it inside the hollow beneath. Willa raised an eyebrow. "That's not your first secret." "No," he said, "but I try not to keep them long." He replaced the board and dusted off his hands. That night, they moved together like clockwork. Luke double-barricaded the back door with an old cedar beam. Willa swept the floor clear of ash and dried leaves trimmed the lantern wicks. She moved slower than him, but he didn't rush her. Every task felt like a thread being pulled taut, quiet tension in every motion. After Tommy went to sleep, Willa sat at the table rubbing pine salve into her calf. The bruising had gone from deep violet to green and yellow, a sickly palette of healing. Luke was carving something at the other end of the table. His hands moved slowly, chipping away at a block of pine. "What is it?" she asked. He didn't look up. "Fence post wedge. Snow's pushing the rails out by the west line." "You fix everything yourself, no one else to do it," he said. Willa studied his face. "Was it like this after they died?" "You just, kept fixing what didn't talk back." He stopped carving. Not frozen, just still. For a while he said finally, "I didn't trust my voice, let alone anyone else's. And now..." He looked up. "Now I know silence don't save anyone." She nodded, holding his gaze. Later they sat by the fire in quiet companionship. Willa mended one of Tommy's sleeves with thread pulled from the hem of her own skirt. Luke cleaned his rifle again, checking the sight twice. The cabin felt smaller now, not from fear, but from the weight of readiness. The walls had listened to too many ghosts. Now they listened to resolve. Willa shifted in her chair. "You think Wade will come himself? If he's offering bounty, he'll send men first," Luke said. "But if he doesn't get what he wants quick enough, yeah, he'll come. You've dealt with men like him before. Too many times." And Luke leaned back, the firelight dancing in his eyes. They're all loud. But none of them know how to stay standing when someone doesn't flinch. Willa smiled faintly. Then maybe I've been practicing the right thing all along. Before bed, she checked the window's every latch and corner. Luke brought in extra wood, stacked it high near the door. The night was colder than the last, the wind dry and sharp like a blade. They met again by the fire, both too tired to speak, but not yet ready for sleep. Willa looked at him. If something happens, if they come while we're sleeping, wake me first. I want to see them. I want to be standing. You will be. She nodded, her jaw set. Then let the snow carry my scent. Let him know I didn't crawl. Luke stepped closer, laid a hand on her shoulder, firm and warm. He'll learn, he said. The fire popped in the silence that followed. As they parted for the night, Luke left the lantern burning low, the rifle within reach of his bedroll. Willa lay beside Tommy, one arm over his chest. The boy murmured in his sleep, but didn't stir. Outside, the wind shifted again, not angry this time, just watching. And in the space between breath and bone, between shadow and firelight, two people who had once only known retreat now braced for the storm. They refused to flee. He laughed like he forgot he lost his father. The frost melted first on the windows, little beads of water trailing down the glass like breath. Morning sunlight reached through the trees, pale and quiet, but real. The snow had stopped sometime in the night, leaving a smooth white hush over everything. For the first time in weeks, there wasn't a cloud in the sky. Willa stirred awake with the scent of warm ash and cedar in her nose. Her leg ached, but not sharply. The swelling had eased. She flexed her toes beneath the blanket and found she could move without grinding her teeth. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Tommy was still curled beside her, hair sticking in all directions, one arm flung across his small chest. She didn't wake him. She just watched him breathe and let the moment stretch. The cabin was still but not empty. Luke was already outside his boots, leaving neat prints across the hard crust of snow leading to the corral. Through the frosted glass, Willa saw the shape of him moving slow and steady, pitching hay into the trough. A pony stood just outside the fence, ears twitching at every motion. She sat up with care, braced herself, then stood, using the crutch Luke had shaped and smoothed himself. The wood fit her hand better now. Or maybe she'd just stopped fighting it. By the time she made it to the front door, Tommy had risen, rubbing sleep from his eyes. His hair was a mess. He patted over in his socks and pressed his face to the window. "Is that a pony?" he whispered. Willa smiled. "Looks like it." Tommy spun toward her, face bright. "Can I go out?" "Put your coat on first." He didn't argue. Just darted toward his bundle of things, grabbed the too small coat, and shoved his arms through the sleeves. Willa opened the door and stepped aside. Tommy tore across the snow like a spark in dry grass. Luke looked up just in time to catch the blur of him. "Easy there, partner," he said, voice low and easy. "She spooks easy." Tommy skidded to a stop, mouth open, eyes huge. "Is it yours?" "She's ours," Luke said. "For now." The pony stamped its feet but didn't bolt. Luke offered Tommy a piece of apple from his coat pocket. "Hold your hand flat." Tommy obeyed, and the pony nibbled from his palm. His smile burst out before he could stop it, wide and sudden. Then it happened, clear as birdsong. Tommy laughed. It was quick, breathy, but full, like something had broken open and let the light in. Luke looked up, startled by it. Willa stood at the door, hand resting on the frame, her mouth parting just slightly. He laughed like he forgot he lost his father. She pressed her hand against her chest, not to hold anything in, but to keep herself from tipping forward under the weight of it. Luke handed Tommy the brush next. "You can stroke her neck gently." The boy nodded, reverent now, and ran the brush along the pony's shoulder. The pony huffed, but stood still. Willa stepped down from the porch, slower than Tommy, steadier than yesterday. Luke met her halfway, taking the arm not on the crutch. "Sun feels good," she said, looking up. "It does," he said. "You look steadier." "I am." They stood in the stillness, watching the boy, the pony, the thaw. Later inside, Tommy chattered about the pony, while Willa stirred oats and dried apples into a pot on the stove. Luke fixed the latch on the back window and kept glancing over his shoulder, half listening, more than half smiling. Willa caught him. "You're good with him." Luke gave a modest shrug. "He's easy to read." "Most folks ain't." "You used to be a father," she said softly. His hands stilled on the window frame. "I was," he replied. She didn't push, just ladled out breakfast and sat down beside her son. They ate slow. There was no rush, no snowstorm pressing in, no shadows at the door, just a warmth growing between spoonfuls and the kind of silence that didn't ask to be filled. After the dishes were rinsed, Tommy tugged Luke's sleeve. "Can I feed her again? Only if you sweep the porch first." Tommy saluted. "Yes, sir." Luke handed him the broom, grinning. Willa shook her head, amused. Not long after Isaac arrived, his mare trailing dust instead of snow. He ducked into the cabin with a satchel full of dried greens and news. "Your leg's coming along," he said after checking the wrap. "You'll be walking free in a few days." "Still stiff," Willa admitted. "Stiff is fine. Broken is not." Isaac stayed for tea, sitting near the fire with a cup between his palms. His eyes wandered the room like he was reading a book no one else could see. "You've settled in," he said. Willa raised an eyebrow. "You sound surprised." "I'm not," Isaac said. "Just watching the shape of things. Takes time to see what fits." Luke passed him a fresh log for the fire. "You hear anything else?" Isaac nodded. "Wade's sending scouts further north." 2 men asked about a woman and child at the post station in Timber Fork. They'll be sniffing around by week's end. Willa's jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. Isaac looked between them. "You still planning to reach Red Hollow soon?" Luke said. Willa added, "But not as runners, as witnesses." Isaac gave a low hum of approval. "Then you'll need your allies close, and your papers closer." "They're hidden," Luke said. "Good." He sipped his tea, then turned to Tommy, who had just come back inside, cheeks red, hair, tousled boots covered in slush. "You been riding yet?" Isaac asked. Tommy shook his head. "Not by myself." Isaac looked at Luke. "Tomorrow." Luke nodded once. Before leaving, Isaac pressed a small leather pouch into Willa's hand. Cedar bark crushed. "Boil it if the pain returns, and burn it if the night gets too still." Willa blinked. "Burn it. It calls the things that remember. Sometimes that's what we need." She nodded, even if she didn't fully understand. That night, Tommy fell asleep with the little wooden horse tucked under one arm. Willa sat near the fire with Luke, her leg propped on a stool, a cup of tea cradled between her hands. "He's different," she said. Luke looked at the sleeping boy. "He laughed today." Willa smiled slowly. "He did." The fire crackled, throwing light across the floor. Luke leaned back in his chair, exhaled slowly. It felt like something real. It was. They didn't speak much after that. They didn't have to. Outside, the snow no longer fell. The air still held the edge of winter, but underneath it, deep in the soil, something else was waking. Not loudly, just enough to say we're still here, and we're not done yet. 3 riders, One of them sits his saddle like a king who never earned the crown. Luke spotted them first just as the sun cracked over the tree line. The morning was quiet, almost too quiet, no wind, no birds, just the faint creak of snow giving under hoof. He stood at the edge of the porch, mug in hand, steam curling into the cold air. The first rider appeared beyond the ridge, followed by two others, each keeping pace, slow and deliberate. They weren't local. He knew that by the way they held themselves, stiff, trained, not wandering cowhands or traders. They rode like men used to giving orders or waiting for someone else to give them. And the man in the center, he sat his horse with the casual arrogance of someone who hadn't been told no in too long. Luke didn't need a closer look to know. Wade Harlan. He turned, walked back inside, and shut the door behind him with a calm that belied the steel forming in his gut. Willa was already up, pulling on her coat. Tommy stood near the window, peering out. "How close?" she asked. "3 riders, half-mile out, making sure we see them." She exhaled slowly. "One of them him," Luke nodded once. "Middle one. Sits his saddle like a king who never earned the crown." She didn't ask how he knew. She just reached for the crutch and took her place by the door. Luke checked the rifle, already cleaned and loaded the night before. They're not gonna draw first. Wade doesn't fight unless he's sure the law's looking the other way. "He brought men," she said. "They'll posture. Maybe try to talk their way in. I won't be hiding. I didn't ask you to." Tommy looked up. "Do I need to?" Luke crouched beside him. "You stay in the back, not scared, just quiet. If we ask you to move, you move." Tommy nodded, trying to look braver than he felt. Outside, the riders approached slow, their horses moving in a line along the main trail. When they reached the edge of the clearing, they stopped. The man in the center dismounted first. Wade Harlan, as polished as ever. His coat too clean, his boots too shiny for the road. His face bore a pleasant mask, but his eyes were like black water, still but hiding something deep and mean. Luke stepped off the porch, rifle slung but visible. Willa stood in the doorway behind him, framed by firelight. Wade smiled. "Now this is a fine picture. Homestead life. Didn't expect to find the lady of the hour so well set up." Luke said nothing. Wade clicked his tongue. "Come now, no greeting, I brought company." Still nothing. Wade turned his attention to Willa. "You're a hard woman to find, Mrs. Red Elk." "I didn't ask to be found," she replied. "I imagine not. Still, you've got something of mine." Willa stepped forward, ignoring the crutch for a moment. Her leg held steady, but her voice was steadier. "You never owned it, Wade. That land was my husband's and mine. We worked it, lived on it, buried family there. You took it with lies and signatures forged behind closed doors." Wade's smile didn't falter. "The law says otherwise." Luke stepped between them, voice low. "You got papers to back that up." Wade held up a weathered leather folder, wagging it like a bone in front of a dog. "Debt note. Filed in Greystone. Signed and sealed." "It's a lie," Willa said. "And you know it." Wade ignored her. "Tell you what," he said, voice smooth. "You hand over what you took, call it a misunderstanding, and I walk away. No trouble. No fuss. No bounty for any trigger-happy hands to collect." Luke's grip on the rifle tightened. "That bounty's still live." Wade shrugged. "Not if I get what I came for." Willa stepped past Luke, crutch planted firm. Her eyes locked on Wade, cold and hard. "You think if you dress it up in paperwork, it stops being theft. You think if you call it a debt, you don't have to see what you really are. But I see you. I've always seen you." Wade's jaw ticked, the smile cracking just enough to show the teeth behind it. Then from the trees came the sound of hooves. Another rider emerged, this one alone. Harlan Fitch. And behind him, a second rider, a smaller man bundled in gray, a satchel tied to his saddle. The lawyer. Luke stepped back, letting them through. Wade's men stiffened, but didn't move. Fitch dismounted first, then helped the lawyer down. The lawyer adjusted his spectacles, opened his satchel, and pulled out a folded document with a red wax seal. "This," he said clearly, "is the notarized deed to the Red Elk property. Registered 3 days ago in Red Hollow. Signed by Mrs. Willa Red Elk and witnessed by 2 parties including myself. All filings are complete." He turned to Wade. "Unless you've filed a counterclaim in district court with certified proof, this land does not belong to you." Wade's expression didn't shift at first. Then his fingers curled tight around the leather folder. "You bastards think a piece of paper changes anything," he hissed. "You think I'm gonna let a squatter and her mountain dog steal?" "She ain't playing," Luke said. "And you're done here." Wade's hand twitched near his holster, but Luke raised the rifle fast. A pause, a breath, then a crack of thunder. Wade screamed, dropping his gun as blood bloomed from his shoulder. He hit the ground, clutching the wound, cursing through clenched teeth. His men hesitated just long enough to read the look in Luke's eyes. Then they turned and rode, spurring their horses hard into the trees, leaving dust and snow behind. Luke lowered the rifle. Fitch walked forward, nudged Wade's pistol away with his boot, and looked down. "You want to press charges?" he asked. "I'll swear I saw you reach first." Wade groaned, curled around his arm. Luke didn't speak. He just turned and walked back to the porch. Inside, Willa pulled Tommy close, burying her face in his hair. The boy trembled, but she held him still, whispering, "It's over. He can't hurt us." Luke stepped through the door, snow melting off his shoulders. He knelt beside Tommy and held out his hand. Tommy looked up, wide-eyed. Slowly, he reached forward and wrapped his small fingers around Luke's. "Pa," the boy whispered. Luke blinked once, then nodded. "Yeah," he said, voice thick. "I'm here. And this time no one could take it away. He's not my blood, but I'd bleed for him." The smell of gunpowder still lingered in the morning air, faint and sour. Snow had fallen again overnight, thin and powdery, covering the stained ground where Wade Harlan had bled the day before. The trail his men carved in their retreat was long gone, erased by wind and fresh flurries. What remained was quieter than before, settled but not calm. Inside the cabin, Tommy slept deeper than he had in weeks, his face pressed into the crook of Willa's arm. She'd stayed awake long after Luke returned inside, holding the boy, whispering whatever small comforts she could find. Now, in the hush of early light, she stroked his hair and watched the fire turn from orange to gold. Luke sat at the table, turning Wade's forged deed over in his hands. The ink had smudged from the blood, but the signature still showed clear as day. His fingers traced the seal like it was a bruise that hadn't faded yet. Willa eased out from under Tommy, wincing as her foot hit the floor. Her leg was healing faster now, but every cold morning reminded her it still wasn't right. "Did he sleep through?" Luke asked without looking up. "He did," she said. "First time in months." He set the paper down, pushed it toward the fire. "You want to burn it?" Willa looked at the folded lie, then at the boy still bundled in his blanket. "No," she said. "Not yet. Proof of what he tried. In case someone asks." Luke nodded. He pulled the iron kettle closer, poured hot water into 2 tin mugs and handed her one. Willa took a sip and sat across from him. Her eyes moved to the doorway, as if expecting Wade to come stumbling back through it, dragging vengeance in behind him. "He won't return," Luke said quietly. "How do you know?" "Because he bleeds like any man. And now he knows it." Willa let that settle between them. The fire cracked, and somewhere outside the pony whinnied faintly. They sat without speaking for a while, both lost in thoughts they didn't name. When Tommy finally stirred, rubbing his eyes and blinking at the morning light, Willa moved first. She knelt beside him and smiled. "We're safe," she said. "It's all right now." He nodded, too sleepy to understand, but trusting her all the same. Later they shared breakfast grits and the last of the apple slices from Isaac's last visit. Tommy ate with a hunger that made Willa laugh, even as her own nerves hadn't quite calmed. When he was done, he ran outside to check on the pony, now officially his in every way that mattered. Luke and Willa watched him through the window, the boy brushing its coat, whispering something only it could hear. "He's a good kid," Luke said. "He's better than I deserve." Luke looked at her sharply. "Don't say that." She looked down into her cup. "I wasn't enough. Not to stop what happened. Not to protect Samuel. I've just kept going." "You kept him alive," Luke said. "You crossed half the territory with a broken leg and a pack full of papers no one believed in but you. He's still breathing because you never quit." She looked up, then surprised by the weight of his words. But Luke didn't look away. "He's not my blood," Luke added, "but I'd bleed for him." Willa's throat tightened. She reached across the table and set her hand on his. "You already have." Outside, Isaac approached on foot, leading his mare through the new snow. Luke stepped out to meet him, while Willa stayed inside to tend to the fire. Tommy ran to greet the old healer, his cheeks red coat flapping as he skidded to a stop near the fence. Isaac ruffled his hair. "You look taller." "I fed her oats myself," Tommy beamed, "and brushed her. She lets me ride a little now." Isaac chuckled. "She must like you. Or maybe you're just stubborn enough to win her." He tied the mare to the rail and followed Luke back inside, stomping snow from his boots. Willa poured him tea before he could ask. "Your hand still steady, I see," Isaac said with a smile. "That's good." "Everything else is slower," Willa replied. "But we're upright." Isaac nodded, serious again. Words spreading. Wade left town with his tail between his legs. Didn't say a word, but folks know. The kind of silence that makes people start asking what really happened. "Let them ask," Luke said. "We've got the truth now. And the deed." Isaac looked to Willa. "You want to take it to court?" "Eventually," she said. "But not until Tommy's older. He needs time to be a boy again." Isaac sat sipping his tea. "That boy's carrying weight most men can't name. But he's strong." Willa looked out the window, watching Tommy tie a red ribbon around the pony's neck. Her voice was quiet. "He asked last night if he could call Luke his pa." Isaac smiled soft. "That's a big word. He didn't ask me for permission. Just said it like it was already true." Luke looked down, his hands still and open. "I'd take that name," he said. "Any day." Isaac stood after a time, buttoned his coat, and looked around the cabin like it was part of a story he'd be telling later. "You two found something up here," he said. "Something most folks don't believe in anymore." "What's that?" Willa asked. Isaac opened the door, the wind brushing snow against his boots. A second beginning. He left with no more words, but the echo of them stayed. That night, as the fire burned low and the snow drifted against the windows again, Luke sat by the door with the rifle beside him, not out of fear, but out of habit. Willa braided Tommy's hair back from his face as he leaned against her knee, half asleep with warmth. "He's different," Luke said softly. "He's healing," she replied. "So are we." Willa leaned her head against the wall and closed her eyes. "Then maybe that's the start." Luke looked across the room at the boy who laughed in the cold, who rode a pony like he belonged in the world again. He wasn't Luke's blood, but he'd bleed for him, and he'd stay. There's the kind of silence you pray for, and then there's the kind you brace against. The silence after Wade's retreat stretched long and wide like a valley full of snow where no boot had ever landed. The kind of silence that made people whisper even when no one else was around. Willa noticed it first, how the wind no longer pushed against the cabin walls with the same bitterness. How the forest, once all shadow and suspicion, now seemed to breathe again. But even in peace, a stillness that deep could feel like waiting. Luke moved through the days with the weight of a man who didn't quite believe it was over. He chopped wood until the stack rose above his waist, repaired the barn roof even though the snow barely found its way inside. He taught Tommy how to tie knots clean, a rifle spot, rabbit tracks in soft snow. He smiled when he meant it, but his eyes still searched the tree line now and again, like they were expecting something to step through and ruin everything. Willa watched him work from the porch, her legs strong enough now to bear weight without the crutch. She walked with a limp, yes, but she walked. She braided her own hair again. She cooked without resting every 10 minutes. And when the pain came, she bore it without flinching. On the 4th morning since Wade's men had vanished, they heard hooves on the main road. Not fast. Not angry. Just deliberate. Luke stepped outside, first rifle slung but not drawn. A single rider approached Martha Klein. She dismounted easily, tying her horse to the rail, without a word. Her eyes scanned the porch, the windows, the land, like she was taking inventory of change. "Place looks better than the last time I saw it," she said. Luke gave a nod. "You're a long way from Hallow Ridge." Martha's lips twitched. Word spreads, even through snow. Willa came to the door, wiping her hands on her apron. "You want coffee? I'd kill for it." Inside, Martha took in the cabin, now warmer, lived-in solid. She noticed the extra bedrolls folded by the hearth. The new coat hung beside Tommy's. The small stack of books on the table that hadn't been there before. "I heard Wade left Greystone with a busted shoulder and a broken name," she said. "Didn't speak much after. Rode south. Fast." "We didn't send him running," Willa said evenly. "He left because he couldn't take what didn't belong to him." Martha sipped her coffee. "That's not what folks are saying." Luke leaned against the wall. "What are they saying?" "That a woman and a ghost of a man held off a snake and sent him back to his hole." Luke glanced at Willa. "Which one of us is the ghost?" Willa smiled faintly. "Depends on the day." Martha set her cup down. "You're a story now, whether you want it to be or not." "We didn't," Willa said. "Doesn't matter. Story's out. You'll have to decide what kind it becomes." Tommy came in from the back, cheeks red from the cold, holding a pair of antlers he found in the trees. He stopped short when he saw the stranger, but Martha gave him a warm nod. "You must be the boy I've heard so much about." Tommy looked to Willa, who nodded. He stepped forward and handed Martha the antlers. "I found these. They're real." She took them with a smile. "I can see that. Strong find." After she left, Willa and Luke sat outside watching Tommy lead the pony in lazy circles near the fence. "What kind of story do you think we are?" she asked. Luke didn't answer right away. "There's the kind of silence you pray for," he said, "and then there's the kind you brace against. I think we're just now learning which one this is." Willa looked toward the sky. It was brighter today. The cold felt less like a threat and more like a season. I don't want to hide anymore, she said. Not in fear, not in the past. Luke looked over at her. You're not hiding. You're healing. And you, she asked. I don't know yet. Maybe still learning how to be seen again. That night, Tommy asked Luke to tell a story, his story. Not the one about the pony or the one about the mountain storm, but the one from before. The one with his wife, his loss, his silence. Luke didn't speak for a long time. Then he sat on the floor by the fire, back to the stone voice, low. I married her when I was 21. Anna. She was louder than a summer storm and twice as bright. We built a place down near the Cimarron, a cabin with a porch and a plum tree out front. She made everything grow. Tommy sat still, wide-eyed. One spring, we were fixing the roof. Rain came fast. She slipped, broke her neck on the ground below. Just like that. Willa held her breath. I buried her myself, planted new plum trees. Didn't speak to a soul for 6 months. Thought if I stayed quiet long enough, maybe I'd forget what her voice sounded like. He looked up at Tommy. But you don't forget. You just carry it quieter. Tommy leaned against him, small but solid. Luke rested a hand on his head. Outside, the wind began to rise again, not harsh but insistent, like something shifting in the woods. Willa sat by the window watching the flames dance in the stove, feeling their heat sink into her bones. The silence was still there, but it no longer felt like bracing. It felt like space. Space to rebuild, to speak, to let what had been broken stand again piece by piece. They weren't ghosts anymore. They were a family, imperfect, wounded, real, and they were staying. Not every war leaves smoke. Some just leave men walking around with pieces missing. The land woke before the people did. Snow began to melt under a morning sun that came up clean and gold over the ridge, cutting through the frost like a blade. Water trickled down from the trees, fat drops landing on bark with tiny thuds. It was quiet, not the kind of silence that made you tense, but the kind that made you pause to listen. Willa stood outside with her hand on the porch post, watching the world come back to itself. The wind had shifted sometime in the night, softening from hard winter to a whisper of spring. A robin landed near the woodpile, tilting its head like it hadn't expected to find this place livable again. Inside, Luke was helping Tommy with his letters. The boy scratched carefully with a short pencil tongue, tucked at the corner of his mouth, brow furrowed like a man handling dynamite. Luke sat beside him, patient but quiet, only speaking when Tommy looked up for help. Willa stepped inside and watched them for a moment. Luke's voice had softened over the weeks, not just in tone but in rhythm. He spoke with pauses now, like someone who finally understood the weight of being heard. You've got the E backward again, he said gently. Tommy groaned. Every time. That's how you learn, Luke replied. Mistakes stick harder than perfect. Willa leaned down and kissed the top of Tommy's head. You're doing just fine, baby. I ain't a baby, he mumbled, though he didn't protest the kiss. Later that morning, Isaac arrived again, this time with someone else riding beside him. A man. Worn jacket eyes, too old for his face. He didn't speak as they approached, just scanned the yard like someone used to measuring danger before stepping into it. Luke met them at the porch. Willa stood behind him, eyes narrowed. Tommy hovered by the window watching. Isaac nodded in greeting. This here's Emery Clay, served with Luke back when the world looked different. Luke's jaw tightened, eyes never leaving the man's face. Didn't expect to see you again. Emery shrugged. Didn't expect to come. but Isaac said there was room for men looking to earn their keep quiet-like. Isaac stepped in. He's steady, and he's done running. Willa looked to Luke, then to Emery. You bring trouble with you, only the kind that already knows my name, Emery said. Luke studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. There's a bunk in the barn. You keep to your word, you can stay. Emery tipped his hat. Fair enough. That night, the fire burned low. Emery kept to the edge of the room, speaking little eyes, tracking every movement. Tommy avoided him, but not out of fear, just caution. He was learning the difference. Isaac sat near the stove, sipping something hot. There's more men like him, he said to Willa. Ones who never came home right. Ones who fought but didn't know how to put the fight down. Willa looked across the room to where Luke sat sharpening a blade, quiet and focused. He's still carrying it, she said. Isaac nodded. Not every war leaves smoke. Some just leave men walking around with pieces missing. I know, she said. I married one. Isaac raised an eyebrow. Samuel, she said. Before he ever met Wade before the land. He came home from the last war different, gentle but far off, like he was always standing at the edge of something. Most are, Isaac said. Luke, too. But he's stepping back from it now. Tommy finally approached Emery the next day, watching him from a distance while the man chopped wood. When Emery noticed, he paused, leaned on the axe, and said nothing. Tommy tilted his head. Were you a soldier? Emery nodded. You ever kill someone? Willa opened her mouth from the porch, but Emery raised a hand gently. I did, he said. Tommy chewed his lip. Was it bad? Emery looked away for a long second, then down at his hands. Sometimes, he said. Sometimes it was worse. Tommy didn't speak again, but he didn't leave either. He sat near the fence, drawing in the dirt with a stick, while Emery worked. Not talking. Just close. That night, Luke stood by the window, watching the stars blink awake. Willa came beside him, brushing her fingers against his hand. You trust him? She asked. Not yet, Luke said. But I know him. Enough to let him stay. He's looking for peace, Luke said. You can see it in the way he walks, like he's not sure the ground won't vanish under him. Willa looked out at the barn where the lamp had gone dark. He won't find it easy here, she said. None of us did, Luke replied. The next day, Emery asked to help with the fence. Luke handed him the mallet, nodded, and worked beside him in silence. By evening, the east rail was mended stronger than before. Tommy ran the length of it 3 times, testing the bounce, laughing with each step. Emery watched him with something close to wonder. He remind you of anyone? Luke asked. Emery shook his head slowly. No. But he makes me wish I could have known someone like him. Luke nodded once. He's been through more than he should have, but he's still light. Hard to keep light in this world, Emery said. Luke looked at the boy, then at the cabin beyond him. We make it where we can. Inside, Willa peeled potatoes by the fire, humming a low tune she hadn't thought of in years. Isaac sat nearby, fixing a torn seam on his coat. The rhythm of the place had changed again, subtle but real. More bodies. More stories. More silence that didn't press down. When Emery entered later, boots caked with dirt, he removed his hat without being asked. Willa handed him a bowl without a word. He accepted it and sat cross-legged near the fire like he'd always belonged. The war wasn't over in his eyes. It might never be. But here at least the battle had softened. Here there was space for the wounded to lay their burdens down. And maybe, just maybe, space enough for the rest of them to breathe without looking over their shoulder. She didn't rebuild her life. She planted a new one. Spring didn't come in a rush. It arrived in slow, shy steps, first in the thawed creek that ran clear past the tree line, then in the green buds pressing up through soil still stubborn with frost. Birds returned, but not all at once. Just a few brave ones at first calling into empty air and waiting for something to call back. The cabin changed with the season. Willa opened the shutters most mornings, letting light spill in where shadows used to linger. She swept the floor without pain in her leg, now moving easier, fuller, like the heaviness of winter had finally released her. Her hair had grown long again, and she didn't bother to braid it some days. It fell over her shoulders, wild and unbothered, catching bits of wind and wood smoke as she worked. Outside, Tommy ran barefoot through the patch of earth Luke had cleared for planting, dragging a stick to mark rows. His laugh rang out like wind chimes, unforced, full of color. Beside the cabin, Luke drove fence posts deeper into the softening ground, a new pen for the goats Isaac promised to bring once the trails were dry. Everything was becoming something else. Emery stayed, not because he asked to, but because no one asked him to leave. He slept in the barn, but joined them for meals, speaking more now about wood grain, saddle care, how to mend a cracked axe handle. He never talked about the war, not directly, but he helped Luke rebuild the chicken coop like a man used to shaping wreckage into usefulness. One evening after supper, Willa sat on the porch with her feet up, a mug of cooled tea in her hands. Luke came out with a book, dog-eared and worn, and read aloud in his slow, gravel-tinged voice. Tommy leaned against her hip, sleepy and content. Emery sat a little off to the side, whittling something from a block of pine. The scent curled up between them, fresh and sweet. "What's it going to be?" Tommy asked, blinking through drowsiness. "Not sure yet," Emery answered. "Sometimes the wood tells you when it's ready." Tommy nodded as if that made perfect sense. The next morning, Willa walked the trail alone past the ridge where the wind had once howled threats, down toward the old ash tree where she'd first collapsed. The snow was gone now, and the ground beneath her boots was solid but soft, giving just enough to remind her that it would grow something if she asked it to. She knelt slowly, pressed a hand to the earth, and whispered a name. Samuel. No ceremony. Just breath and soil. She stood not with sorrow, but with recognition, and turned back toward the home she'd chosen, not as a hiding place, but as a beginning. Isaac came days later with 2 goats and a letter. He handed the paper to Willa, the seal cracked from travel. From Red Hollow. Clerk's office. She opened it slowly. Her eyes scanned the page, then again. "It's final," she said. "The claims registered in my name. Full ownership. Backed by witness and title." Luke placed a steady hand on her back. She didn't smile. Not right away. Just exhaled deep and long, like she'd been holding her breath for years. "I'll take it to the cemetery," she said. Tommy looked up. "What's that?" "Where your father rests," she said gently. "Where I first buried the promise we made to each other." He nodded solemnly, understanding enough. Isaac stayed the night. Around the fire they shared stew and stories, real ones this time. Laughter came easier, like it belonged. Near the end of the night, Isaac raised his cup. To land earned, not taken. They all drank. Emery added, low but firm, and to the living who remember. The next morning, Willa packed a satchel. She wore Samuel's old coat, the one she'd mended herself, the seams tighter than they'd ever been in his hands. Luke saddled the horses. Tommy helped tie down supplies. "I want to go," Tommy said. "Next time," Willa answered. "This is something I need to do alone." He nodded, trusting her now in a way he hadn't when they first ran. Luke rode with her as far as the ridge, then stopped. "You sure I am?" she said. He didn't kiss her goodbye. He just touched her hand and held it longer than needed. She rode hard that day, following the river, down into the valley, where the earth remembered everything. The cabin they once shared was gone, the roof long caved in, but the tree they planted on their wedding day still stood its roots deep and wide. She scattered wildflower seeds at its base, the ones she'd saved through 2 winters. No marker, just growth. She stood in silence, not broken, but whole. On her way back, she passed familiar trails. She saw faces that remembered her eyes that used to pity, now filled with something different. Respect, maybe, or awe. Back at the new homestead, Tommy was waiting with muddy hands and a grin full of missing teeth. "I built a fence around the garden while you were gone," he said proudly. "I bet it's crooked," she teased. "It is." They laughed and she swept him up in her arms, limp and all. Inside, Luke stirred the pot over the fire. Emery carved at the same block of pine, nearly done now. Isaac's goats snorted near the pen, content. Willa stood at the doorway and looked out, not over her shoulder, but forward. The land was hers. The boy was safe. The man beside her didn't carry her burdens, but he never let her fall. She didn't rebuild her life, Isaac would say later when telling her story in the towns beyond the ridge. She planted a new one, and it grew.